Relevant studies were identified, even if they did not necessarily include cognitive assessment as a keyword or within the abstract. 250 removed. 34 publications which reviewed the neuropsychological effects of interventions were identified and carefully reviewed. The majority of the eliminated studies did not have an ADHD control group or did not use neuropsychological measures, rather relying on self-observer reports of behavior and symptomology. Other reasons for exclusion included inability to access relevant data or calculated effect sizes, such as
Drexler et al. 2007, Van der Donk, Hiemstra Binning, Jane Kalf, Van der Leij en Lindauer, 2015, Verret et al. 2012, Studies.
Were deemed to fulfill all inclusion and exclusion criteria from unique publications. One study, Verta et al. 2010 had two intervention groups and an additional control group, thus the data from the control group was included twice, with just half the stated sample size. From each study, we calculated and included all significant and non-significant results. 10 studies were included from analysis of previous meta-analyses, and the rest were from further searches. Asterisks in the reference section are used to identify studies included in the meta-analyses, and Figure 1 provides an overview of the search process. 2.4. Quality assessment to reviewers. BL and AH assessed the quality of data in included studies. We used the National Institute of Health NIH Quality Assessment Tools NIH 2014. The NIH tool is preferred because it is more comprehensive and thus enables an exhaustive assessment of the quality of Landres et al. Journal of Psychiatric Research 120, 2020, 405543 included studies. Additional methodological appraisal of each eligible RCT study followed. The Cochrane Handbook for Systematic Reviews Interventions version 5.1.0. 2.5. Data coding statistical data including means, standard deviations, and number of subjects were extracted from each study for pre and post intervention results in both groups. The results of each neuropsychological test were categorized according to which neuropsychological function they tested. Tests that were commonly used and had frequent literature references, we categorized according to the recognized cognitive function. In tests not commonly used, we relied on the author's categorization. The categories of cognitive function studied included attention, flexibility, inhibition, working memory, and the final category of higher executive function, which included planning and reasoning. Only studies including group means and standard deviations of neuropsychological scores were included. In cases where there were several reported scores for various measures for one cognitive function in an individual study, we extracted all data but chose to use the most commonly cited test for the most relevant measure based on the author's intensive review of the literature. Thus, for each published study, it was possible to have 5 effect sizes. Finally, if there were multiple effect sizes for a specific function and they were derived from equally relevant tests, we used the highest effect size reflecting the most robust effect. The following variables were included in a coding sheet: study identification number, first author, year of publication, number of total participants, number of clinical and non-clinical participants, name of intervention 1, name of intervention 2 or control, number of participants in each group, whether the participants took medication during the trial and testing, the mean age and age range of participants, language of testing, and which cognitive tests were used for each cognitive category. We initially created a coding sheet with all tests and results, even if there were multiple test results for a single category, but following the method detailed above, we created a final coding sheet including one pre-intervention score, M and SD, and one post-intervention score, M and SD, for each cognitive function tested within a single study. All studies were coded into data extracted independently by the first two authors. Inter-rater reliability was 100%. All data was extracted from papers, and if there was a lack of sufficient information to calculate effect sizes, the authors were contacted for standard deviations. Figure 1. Flowchart displaying the literature search process according to PRISMA guidelines. Moore et al. 2009. B. Landre et al. Journal of Psychiatric Research 120, 2020, 405544.
Progesterone, estradiol, cortisol, testosterone, aldosterone. Oh no, what happened? What happened? We're listening to that. There we go. Let's see. One cannot just study.
2.6. Statistical analyses of effect size calculations were made using the psychometric program Lenhard 2017 and then entered into a program Excel sheet to analyze effect sizes according to Moore's calculations. Morris 2008. This approach allows inclusion of intervention studies containing groups with uneven sample sizes and varying pretest means and standard deviations, thus enabling to weight the estimation of the population effect size. Effect size calculation was based on the recommended formula, mean pre-to-post treatment change minus the mean pre-to-post treatment control group change divided by the bold pretest standard deviation with a bias adjustment. Morris 2008. Studies with insufficient and missing data were excluded from the meta-analysis. Given the heterogeneity of ADHD assessments, sample chart characteristics, and implementation of treatments within domains in the included studies, we chose a priori to use random effects models, Field and Gillette 2010. Effect sizes were also calculated according to Rosenthal 1991. In order to assess homogeneity and heterogeneity, we examined the data using Q-test, Sanchez-Mecca and Faldidio 1997, Shadish and Haddock 1994, and I2, Higgins and Thompson 2002. Accordingly, if the Q value is not significant, then the effect sizes were considered homogeneous, and the mean effect size was considered the best estimation for the data. However, if the Q is significant, moderators should be suggested, as the effect sizes were considered to be heterogeneous. 3. Results. Our final meta-analysis included 18 studies and 19 interventions, which yielded 49 effect sizes for the 5 categories of cognitive functions. Initially, the cognitive function most susceptible to the intervention was entered into a meta-analysis comprising all the published studies. The results were not deemed homogeneous, generating a Q value of 28.57, P greater than 0.05, and I2 equals 61.5, which reflects the presence of a moderator or several moderators. A potential moderator was deemed to be medication. While the majority of studies included both medicated and unmedicated participants, 4 studies solely included unmedicated participants. When studies were separated into 2 meta-analyses reviewing medicated and unmedicated participants, a homogeneous effect size was generated for both. As can be seen in Table 2, unmedicated participants improved significantly in cognitive functions, with an effect size of 0.67 generated. Q equals 0.05, P less than 0.05, I2 equals 0. 95% CIL equals minus 3.76, 4.84. Studies with medicated participants, see Table 3, also generated a homogeneous effect size of 0.68, Q equals 0.05, P less than 0.05, I2 equals 0. 95% CIL equals minus 3.54, 5.05, indicating only a slightly higher effect of non-pharmaceutical treatments when combined with medication. The homogeneous findings indicated that there was no need to search for further moderators. A funnel plot of included studies did not show any asymmetry, an indication that significant publication bias was unlikely. See Figure 2. Following the understanding that non-pharmaceutical treatments were moderately to largely effective both with and without the AC accompaniment of medication, the second stage of the current study was to determine which intervention was most successful and whether each intervention type could be categorized as having a homogenic, significant effect on cognitive functions. All intervention categories demonstrated homogeneous and significant results. See Figure 3. Physical exercise interventions demonstrated the highest effect size of 0.93, DF equals 4, 95% CIL equals 0.48, 1.45. See Table 4. The studies were deemed to be homogeneous. Q equals 8.16, P less than 0.05, I2 equals 50.98. Cognitive training interventions demonstrated the lowest effect size of 0.45, DF equals 1, 95% CIL equals minus 0.08, 0.89. See Table 5 and were deemed homogeneous. Q equals 0.05, P less than 0.05, I2 equals 0. Although given that only 2 studies were included, this finding should be interpreted with caution. CBD interventions demonstrated a moderate effect size of 0.70, DF equals 2, 95% CIL equals 0.24, 1.21. See Table 6 and studies were deemed Table 2 effect sizes and methodology of studies with non-medicated participants. Author age range or mean, number of participants, duration of intervention, intervention 1, intervention 2 control meds measures with SIG, improvement in clinical symptomatology, cognitive test, cognitive function effect size.
Choix égal 15, 13, 18, 25, 90 minutes session, 3 times A.
Week for 6 weeks physical exercise, aerobic exercise, control no ADHD sim. WCST preservative error flexibility 0.87.
Miranda et Al 23, 7, 10, 42, 45 minutes session 16.
Sessions over course of 10 weeks CBT, control no parent rating, ADHD sim. Teacher rating, ADHD sim. Sentences and digits and combined inhibition 0.99.
Klingberg og andre, 2005, 7, 12, 53, 40 minutter hver dag for 25 dages.
Out. Cognitive training control, no parent rating, Connors and ADHD symptoms through time inhibition 0.38.
Gela de Etal 20, 17, 7, 13, 76, 45 minutos 3 limits a week, for 10 a 12.
Weeks neurofeedback physical activity, no non-stop signal commission inhibition 0.28.
Prins, Dovis, Pensioen, Ten Brink en Van der Oort, 2011, 9.47, 51, 35 tot 50.
Min sessions 1 a week for 4 weeks. Cognitive training, game cognitive training, normal. No and coursing visual social WN working memory 0.82 mean effect size 0.67 B Lambres, et al. Journal of Psychiatric Research 120, 2020, 40 55 45. Table 3 exercises and methodology of studies with medicated participants. Author age range or mean. Number of participants. Duration of intervention. Intervention 1. Intervention 2. Control meds measures with SIG. Improvement of clinical symptomatology. Cognitive test. Cognitive function effect size back JAS et al. 2011, 416, 35, 30-minute sessions. 2 3 times a week for 10 15 weeks. 30 sessions total. Neurofeedback. Biofeedback. Both parents rating. ADHD sim. Teacher rating. ADHD sim. CBT commission errors inhibition 0.65.
Beauregard et Lévesque, 2006, 8 à 12, 20, 60.
Min sessions 3 times a week for 13 weeks. 40 sessions total. Neurofeedback control both ends through. Natural trials mean score. Inhibition 0.93.
Bersley et Al 2007, 9, 13, 30, 90 minutes session, 11 Twisa.
Week for 12 15 weeks. Total 15 sessions. Neurofeedback CBT. Both parent rating. ADHD SYM. BREIF. Teacher rating. Brief go no go commission inhibition 0.65.
Henrich et Al 2004, 7, 13, 22, 50 minutes session for 3 voyelles.
Total 25 sessions. Neurofeedback control both parent rating. ADHD sim. CPT impulsive errors inhibition 0.74. Steiner et al. 2011, 12.4, 20, 45-minute training. Twice a week for 4 months. Neurofeedback cognitive training. Both parent rating. Connors. BASC. Student rating. Connors CPT response control inhibition 0.39. Yu Kai Chang, Hung, Wang, Hatfield and Hung, 2014, 5, 10, 27, 90-minute session, twice a week for 8 weeks physical exercise, aquatic exercise, control both end, go, no go accuracy inhibition 0.72, YK, Chang, Liu, Yu and Lee, 2012, 8, 15, 40, 30-minute session, physical exercise, aerobic exercise, control NAN, WCST non-preservative error flexibility 0.73.
Gapin et Al 15, 18, 25, 20, 40 minutes session physical exercise.
Aerobic exercise, physical exercise, yes, and digits, mean inhibition 0.42 pan et al. 2016, 6, 12, 32, 70-minute training, twice a week for 12 weeks physical exercise, racket sport, control both end, Astrut word color inhibition 1.92, Miranda M, J, Soriano M, 2002, 8, 9, 50, 2 sessions a month, each 3 hour long, for 4 months CBT control and apparent rating, ADHD SYM, APC teacher rating, ADHD SYM, Connors, school problem inventory, self-control through interference inhibition 0.57 Verta et al. 2010, 21, 50, 15, 60 minutes, once a week, for 10 weeks CBT control both self-ratings, BATS flexibility 0.51 Menezes et al. 2015, 8, 13, 18, 60-minute meetings, twice a week for 8 months cognitive training control, both non-through interference inhibition 0.5 Salamone et al. 2015, 18, 50, 37, 2 training sessions and home practice for 5 weeks cognitive training control, both self-rating, Connors, BDI, GSES hotel task, attention tasks, attention 0.1 minute effect size 0.68 B Lambis, et al. Journal of Psychiatric Research 120, 2020, 40, 55, 46.
Is that not a steroid, is it? No, no. Aldosterone. Reading aldosterone system? Shit. I forgot. Let's see. Estrogen, estradiol, progesterone, and what else we got? Testosterone. What was it? Aldosterone. Yeah, it was aldosterone. Cortisol, estradiol. Boom. All right, tyrosine-derived hormones. Ugh. 5 examples of tyrosine-derived hormones. Dopamine, serotonin. These are neurocrines. Oxytocin. No, that's peptide. Oh. What else? Okay. Dopamine, epinephrine. All right, epinephrine, norepinephrine, thyroxine, and triiodothyronine. I said tetraiodothyronine the other day. I mean, probably said. Okay, thyroxine. Okay. Isn't this fun, guys? All right. Okay. Let's see what else we got. Now, where'd the paper that I'm pretending to listen to go? Now, I cannot believe. I mean, this is crazy. All right, let's see if I can add this clipboard and paste it in the conversation. This breaks all the rules. Copy. Save the photos. Boom. All right. All right, let's go down this way. The tables are killing me. I do love a good bunch of tables, but this is not. Right, let's just listen to the results. Let's see. Our final meta-analysis included. Sorry. Unmedicated participants improved significantly. Cognitive function effect size of 0.67. So the medicated participants also generated homogeneous effect sizes 0.68. Wow, huge difference, indicating only a slightly higher effect on particle treatments when combined with medication. The homogeneous findings indicated that there were interesting. One indicated that studies that show symmetry and indication significant publication bias was unlikely. All right, following the understanding in non-pharmaceutical treatments are highly moderately largely largely affected both with and without accompaniment medication. The second stage of the current study was to determine which intervention was most successful and whether each intervention type could be categorized as having a homogenic significant effect on cognitive functions. As intervention categories demonstrated homozygous and significant results. Physical exercise interventions demonstrated the highest effect size, and studies were deemed to be homogeneous. Physical, I definitely feel that. Cognitive training interventions demonstrated the lowest effect size of 0.4 were deemed interesting. Wow. Wow. Inhibition? What is that? Wow. All right, we'll have to come with inhibition therapy. Should really see. I need a citation. All right, where's Vivaldi? Sotero. Copy. Oh, copy. I need the. I just copy and paste it. No, that's not what I wanted to do. Well, that's not what I wanted. Let's see. Tools. Copy citation. It's not really the page that I wanted, though. There we go. And give me the copy. Ooh, there's a shortcut for it. Command Shift C. Yeah, I think it was something like that. There we go. All right, let's do the PDF. Oops, undo please. There we go. And I need the PDF itself, but that's okay. Yeah. Okay, inhibition. So a fuse. Let's make that a header. Bibliography heading. And let's see. Really bad. Very good. Yeah, your feedback was lower. 0.67. Yeah, let's just copy all the results. Copy. Paste that quote in. The line breaks, right? Like, what do I use? Oh, God. That's a mess. Oh, well. Not enough. Okay. Dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. Thyroxine. I do remember that. Okay. Bad. Proteins. Alright. Granules. Secretory granules. Soluble in water and free circulating blood in free form. Long half-life. And bind to intracellular targets. Transcription factors. Let's see. Alright, so intracellular synthesis. Intracellular synthesis. Target vesicles. Let's see. Released by blank through plasma. Diffusion. Soluble, circulating, bound proteins, protein binding proteins. And what else we got? Let's see. Have a long half-life. Yeah. Fusion. Steroid like hormones, right? Aldosterone. Aldosterone. Cortisol. Estradiol. Progesterone. Testosterone. Tyrosine derived hormones. Let's see. I don't know, man. All right. Epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin. What am I missing? Oh, thyroxine and thyroid. I think serotonin is also. Isn't serotonin also a binding hormone? I can't recall. Okay. Let's see. Tyrosine through adrenal medulla becomes catecholamines, stored in blank, released by exocytosis, hydrophilic secretory granules, probably. Binding membrane receptor. Tyrosine through thyroid becomes thyroid hormones, tridothyronine and thyroxine, stored in thyroid follicles, or released immediately after synthesis by diffusion through the membrane of soluble thyroid follicle secretory granules. Yes. How's this? Okay. Regulation of hormone secretion, negative feedback loops. Oh, good God. Yes. Blood. I was lazy. I didn't want to make this. Epidemic. Yes, releasing neurons, releasing hormone, pituitary gland, That's technically a paracrine, right? What a convoluted system. So you have hypothalamic neurons that then signal through the release into the blood to then stimulate the release of hormones in the pituitary gland. Who designed this system? Man. Tropic hormone, peripheral endocrine gland, hormone, target organs, physiological effects. All right, circadian rhythms and hormone secretion. Trying to think corticothyroid hormone. I forget. Yes, falls from ACTH. Remind me. We're in a corticotrophic hormone. Acthar infantilis. So, peptide hormone produced and secreted by the anterior pituitary gland. It is also used as a medication and diagnostic agent. Cool. 11 a.m. to 12 a.m. Okay. Great. That's something. Adrenal corticotropic. Oops, wait. That is undeserved. Okay. Falls from 8 a.m. to 12 a.m. Then rises during that time from less than 10 picograms per ml to deciliters. Kangaroos up and down. Mountain. Right, yeah, tenths. 100. Alright, so that'd be 100, yeah. So it'd be 100 times more. Micrograms, so they can do 1 microgram per deciliter. Yeah. And keep our stuff consistent from 1 to 4. It's gotta be the original measurement. 10's a little bit odd. Alright, anyway. Alright, the hypothalamus is the base. Let's see. I also on YouTube. Let's see. I wish I could play some. There we go. Ooh, look. Live. I am the one watcher. Pretty sure. Okay. Pituitary consists of 2 major parts. Anterior pituitary or adenohypophysis. Posterior. Ah, D&D, there we go. Okay, yes. Posterior pituitary gland secretes peptides. Oxytocin, right, and ADH. Gosh. Okay, OT is important for uterine contractions and milk ejection. ABP and ADH is important for fluid balance and blood volume. Okay, so yeah, adrenocorticotropin hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone. But this is all about the decrease from 8 a.m. to 12 a.m. and then an increase from less to 1 microgram per deciliter to 4 micrograms per deciliter. Boom. All right, tyrosine-derived hormones. Let's see. Oops. Tyrosine-derived hormones. These are dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine. Let's see. What else we got? Let's see. We need thyroxine and triiodothyronine. So that's 5. Dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, thyroxine, and triiodothyronine. Okay. Transcription, excision of introns, splicing, capping of signal, hormone, and copeptides. Yes, that's important. Let's see, and then translation and of the signal protein, the copeptides, and the peptide, right? Translation, yep. NH2 signal hormone copeptides. It's all linked together. NH2, okay, cool. Excision of introns, and then capping signal hormone copeptide. All together, the pre-pro hormone in the endoplasmic reticulum. All right. Signal degradation processing resulting in hormone copeptides in the Golgi. There you go. Signal degradation, right? Because it goes to the Golgi for packaging to then be exported. Otherwise, yes, and then you degrade the signal, degrade the signal, right? Processing and packaging into the hormone secretory granules. Okay. All right, hormones, tyrosine-derived hormones, yep, secretory granules for sure. Regulation of hormone secretion, negative feedback loops. Right. Releasing hormones, so hypothalamus releases the hypothalamic neurons release they're releasing hormones that then travel to the pituitary, which then releases the hormones, which then travel through circulation through the bloodstream and inhibit the like stimulating hormones that travel through the bloodstream and stimulate the target tissue to secrete whatever it's supposed to secrete. And that then inhibits the hypothalamus from releasing the releasing hormone. Yes. Physiological effects. Peripheral endocrine gland. And then the word for that is peripheral endocrine gland. The target hormone's physiological effects. So there's a physiological response driven negative feedback. So what I just described is the endocrine axis driven negative feedback system. But there is also the physiological response driven negative feedback system. So, which includes target organ and physiological. All right, so endocrine gland secretes hormones, which gives target hormone, which causes physiological effects in the circulating blood. Body EG glucose takes it back. So we have something like blood glucose, for example. Yes. Okay, so something you consume. So that's just produced by your body. So blood glucose activates the pancreatic beta cells to secrete insulin. That insulin then goes into the body and then causes cells to uptake glucose, and to divide and stuff and to grow, and then that then goes back. And then it makes sense because the nutrient sensing, so insulin-like growth hormones, those insulin-like growth hormones, it would make sense they're derived from insulin because originally you just needed a nutrient sensor to see, well, what can I grow? Can I divide? What? And then from those, you developed more signals, some for probably amino acids and all of those kind of conversion insulin, though, but other nutrients and signals, and then you have coordinated growth response to presence of nutrients. All right, so now we have, what do we have? Okay, so that was fun. So I'd say we got that. Hormone receptors. Hormone receptors are located on all kinds of tissues, things. Intracellular signaling surface. Oh, right. So if they're an intracellular signal, so that might be in the nucleus, or they might be inside the membrane, intracellular or on plasma membrane. Sure, can activate / inhibit intracellular signaling pathways and origin expression. Yep. The endocrine system consists of hormones that are made in blank, secreted into the blank. Right, made in endocrine glands, secreted into the bloodstream. They transport to target cells. They exert physiological action. Maybe cause, symptoms, physically. All right. We have 3 major classes of hormones: peptides, steroid/steroid-like, tyrosine-derived. Hormones of the system's secretion are highly regulated. The overall goal of the endocrine system is to maintain normal body homeostasis in the blood. CTH declines from 8 a.m. to midnight when you sleep, and it increases from 10 picograms per ml to 40 picograms per ml. Wow. Okay, hypothalamus and pituitary anatomy in general. The blank, okay, that would be the pituitary gland, informs the walls of the third and fourth ventricle. The hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is joined to the pituitary gland by the pituitary stalk, the stalk hypophysis, or neurohypophyseal stalk. Pituitary gland sits below the hypothalamus in the pocket called the soloturcica. It consists of 2 major parts: anterior to pituitary, and hypophysis, main part of the pars salis, posterior pituitary, and neurohypophysis and pars nervosa. Pars salis, pars nervosa. Neurohypophyseal stalk, yep. Soloturcica, pons. That must be the pars nervosa. Pars nervosa. Pars salis. No hypothesis. Neurohypophysis, pituitary. There we go. All right, hypothalamic. Let's see. That would be. I have no clue. Jesus Christ. Wish I can draw. Let's see. My friends, don't ask me what your sacrifices for. Hey, yeah, okay, anyway. Pituitary. Let's. Oh yes, I better go check on the liquid nitrogen. I'm sure this will be safe here. Ugh. Let's see. Log. Alright, let's go check. Alright. I have no idea. This is the mammal. Okay. Mammomorpholemic tract. I mean, neuroanatomy is really important to me. but good. So that's that looks like the part of the whatever the hell it's called, the networking center. Shit, whatever. Interthalamic adhesion. Oh, how the fuck was I supposed to that? Nucleus, posterior nucleus. Good God, are you gonna make me go through all these? Jesus Christ. Oh no, man. Paraventricular nucleus. I was not gonna guess that. Hey. Let's see. The fornix. Oh yeah, that's familiar. The anterior commissure. Oh Jesus Christ. I feel like so many people get lots of pictures. A lot of people who don't get it. Right, anyway, okay, then we have the, that's a mammalia tract thing. Thalamus, that was the one I was looking for. The mammillothalamic tract. Now, I kind of got it right. That's the adhesion. Subthalamic adhesion? No, it's the interthalamic adhesion. That's kind of close. That would be the, it's not a fornix, it's a posterior nucleus. That one is the, I remember, paraventricular nucleus, that guy. Alright, hormone receptors and signaling. Ain't nobody here. Alright, let's check on the outline. Hormone receptors and signaling. Location, hormone receptors, location. Interested in signaling pathways. No alarms. It's a good sign. $13.4 and this one is currently at 10.6. All right. Okay, that's good news. All right, let's just go ahead and take care of this real quick. Okay, hormone receptors, location. The location would be inside the cell. Gosh, I left my laptop downstairs. Tell you what, let's go downstairs, grab the laptop and stuff, and then we'll do it. Okay. Inhibit pathway, plasma membrane. That is the fornix. Yes. That's a weird track. And that is the, I don't even know. All right, let's stop for now, and then we'll get back to this. Synchronize. Ooh, we can listen to a book. Tell you what, you can live in my pocket reading this book with me while I get my stuff together. Not a book. Well, it could be a book. Why not? Let's see what books we have. You're just going to be dragged through it with me. It's only going to be at 2x, so that's pretty easy. No worries. Here we go. Endocrinology. Boom. Oh my god, I finished. Holy shit. Well, oh wait. No, that's not the end. That's the beginning. Oh. Wow. Failure.
508 PRTBI, the immune system in health and disease, the effector phase, T cells are stimulated to secrete a variety of cytokines, including interferon, IFN, and lymphotoxin, TNF, which recruit and activate macrophages and other inflammatory cells. A DTH response normally does not become apparent until an average of 24 hours after the second contact with the antigen and generally peaks 48 to 72 hours after the stimulus. The delayed onset of this response reflects the time required for the cytokines to induce localized influxes of macrophages and their activation. Once a DTH response begins, a complex interplay of nonspecific cells and mediators is set in motion that can result in extensive amplification of the response. By the time the DTH response is fully developed, only about 5% of the participating cells are antigen-specific TH1 cells. TH1 cells are important initiators of the DTH, but the principal effector cells of the DTH response are activated macrophages. Cytokines elaborated by helper T cells, including IFN and lymphotoxin, induce blood monocytes to adhere to vascular endothelial cells, migrate from the blood into the surrounding tissues, and differentiate into activated macrophages. As described in Chapter 2, activated macrophages exhibit enhanced phagocytosis and an increased ability to kill microorganisms. They produce cytokines, including TNF and IL-1, that recruit more monocytes and new neutrophils, and enhance the activity of DH1 cells, amplifying the response. The heightened phagocytic activity and the buildup of lytic enzymes from macrophages in the area of an infection lead to nonspecific destruction of cells and thus of any intracellular pathogens, such as mycobacteria. Usually, any presented pathogens are cleared rapidly with little tissue damage. However, in some cases, and especially if the antigen is not easily cleared, a prolonged DTH response can develop, which becomes destructive to the host, causing a visible granulomatous reaction. Granulomas develop when continuous activation of macrophages induces them to adhere closely to one another. Under these conditions, macrophages assume an epithelioid shape and sometimes fuse to form multinucleated giant cells, figure 15158. These giant cells displace the normal tissue cells, forming palpable nodules and releasing high concentrations of lytic enzymes, which destroy surrounding tissue. The granulomatous response can damage blood vessels and lead to extensive tissue necrosis. The response to mycobacterium tuberculosis illustrates the double-edged nature of the DTH response. Immunity to this intracellular bacterium involves the DTH response, in which activated macrophages wall off the organism in the lung and contained within a TRNULOMA type lesion called the tubercle. See figure 1515b. Often, however, the release of concentrated lytic enzymes from the activated macrophages within the tubercles damages the very lung tissue that the immune response aims to preserve. The DTH reaction can be detected by a skin test. The presence of a DTH reaction can be measured experimentally by injecting antigen intradermally into an animal line. A. TH1 cell, multinucleated giant cell, epithelioid cell. B. Intracellular bacteria, activated macrophage. Figure 1515a prolonged DTH response can lead to formation of a granuloma, a nodule-like mass. A. Lytic enzymes released from activated macrophages in the granuloma can cause extensive tissue damage. B. Same section of the granuloma associated. Observing whether a characteristic skin lesion develops days later at the injection site associates with a positive skin test reaction indicates that the individual has a population of sensitized TH1 cells specific for the test antigen. For example, to determine whether an individual has been exposed to M. tuberculosis, PPD, a protein derived from the cell wall of his mycobacterium, is injected intradermally. Development of a red, slightly swollen, firm lesion at the site between 48 and 72 hours later indicates previous exposure. Note, however, that a positive test does not allow one to conclude whether the exposure was due to a pathogenic form of M. tuberculosis or to a vaccine antigen, which is used in some parts of the world. Contact dermatitis is a type IV hypersensitivity response. Contact dermatitis is one common manifestation of type IV hypersensitivity. The simplest form of contact dermatitis, allergy, hypersensitivities, and chronic inflammation, Chapter 15509, occurs when a reactive chemical compound binds to skin proteins, and these modified proteins are presented to T cells in the context of the appropriate MHC antigens. The reactive chemical may be a pharmaceutical, a component of a cosmetic or a hair dye, an industrial chemical such as formaldehyde or turpentine, an artificial hapten such as FLUORLDINITRLBENZENE, a metal ion such as nickel, or the active allergen from poison ivy. Sometimes, however, the antigen is presented to T cells by a less familiar route. Some chemicals are first metabolized by the body to form a reactive metabolite, which, in turn, binds to proteins presented by the MHC. Some investigators propose that other molecules have the capacity to bind directly to the T cell receptor and directly stimulate an effector or memory T cell. These ideas are new and still being evaluated. What seems clear, however, is that many small molecules in drugs can attach to cell surface proteins of T cells as well as of APCs and give rise to the hypersensitivity reactions characteristic of contact dermatitis. The classical DTH response to mycobacterium antigens described above is mediated by CD4, Th1 T cells. However, we now know that T cell hypersensitivity reactions directed toward other antigens are mediated by a variety of T cell subtypes and cytokines. The severe dermatitis associated with some type IV hypersensitivities to drugs, for example, is caused by CD8 T cells and NK cells. These cytotoxic cells induce death of keratinocytes and sloughing of the skin or mucous membrane. Diseases in which this mechanism is active include erythema multiforme, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, and toxic epidermal necrolysis. They can be fatal. The allergen in these cases can be associated with drugs as common as the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medication ibuprofen. The incidence of such complications is higher in males than in females and usually occurs in young adults. At present, the best way to avoid a DTH response is to avoid the causative antigen. Once hypersensitivity has developed, topical oral corticosteroids can be used to suppress the destructive immune response. Chronic inflammation, regardless of whether an immune response is activated appropriately or inappropriately, a full-blown immune response makes one feel ill, largely because of the activity of inflammatory mediators released by innate immune cells. In most cases, the misery subsides when the insult, antigen, allergen, or toxin is removed. However, in some circumstances, an inflammatory stimulus persists, generating a chronic inflammatory response that has systemic effects, which have been associated most directly with type 2 diabetes. Recent studies also raise a possibility that chronic inflammation exacerbates heart disease, kidney disease, Alzheimer's, and cancer. Figure 1516. Infections can cause chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammatory conditions have a variety of causes, some of which are still being identified. Figure 1516. Some are the result of infections that persist because chronic inflammation, IL-6, TNF, Greek small letter alpha, IL.
Enavita. Il-18.
Figure 1516 causes and consequences of chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation has infectious and non-infectious causes, including obesity. Chronic inflammatory conditions, regardless of cause, have common systemic consequences, some of which are related to the effects of inflammatory mediators on metabolism, type 2 diabetes, and some of which are related to the effects of inflammatory mediators on tissue organization and cell proliferation, e.g., cancer. Other disorders have also been associated with chronic inflammation, although the mechanisms behind the association may be indirect and are still being studied. Infectious causes. Unresolved infection, intestinal microbes. Non-infectious causes. Obesity, tissue damage, heart disease and atherosclerosis, tissue changes. Cell death, scarring, fibrosis, blood vessel growth, angiogenesis, cell proliferation, metabolic changes. Impaired insulin signaling, other systemic disease. Organ failure, kidney, heart, liver, cancer, Alzheimer's. 510 PRTVI, the immune system in health and disease, pathogen has continual access to the body. For instance, gum disease and unhealed wounds make the body vulnerable to continual microbe invasion and immune stimulation. Gut pathogens can also contribute. Although our commensal bacteria play an important role in dampening our reach to microbes that we ingest, this protective mechanism can fail, and gut microbes can contribute to a chronic inflammatory state. Some chronic inflammatory conditions are caused by pathogens that evade the immune system and remain active in the body, inspiring continual low-level inflammatory reactions. Fungi and mycobacteria are two examples of pathogens that are not always successfully cleared and have the ability to continually stimulate immune cells that release inflammatory molecules and cytokines. There are non-infectious causes of chronic inflammation. Interestingly, pathogens are not the only causes of chronic inflammation. Physical damage to tissue also releases MOLCUS, damage-associated molecular patterns, or DAMPs, that induce the secretion of inflammatory cytokines. If tissue damage is not resolved because of continual mechanical interference, for instance, the inflammatory stimulus persists. Tumors, autoimmune disorders, atherosclerosis, and heart disease, each of which results in tissue damage that stimulates immune responses, are other examples of disorders that can cause chronic inflammation. The biomedical community was startled, however, to discover that one of the most common non-infectious causes of chronic inflammation today is obesity, a condition that did not, at first, suggest a relationship to inflammation. Obesity is associated with chronic inflammation. Obesity has long been associated with a constellation of metabolic and systemic disorders, including type 2 diabetes. The biological mechanisms responsible for these associations are still being investigated. However, recent work suggests that many of the systemic effects of obesity are mediated by inflammation. What does fat have to do with inflammation? It turns out that the immune system is not the only source of inflammatory cytokines. Visceral adipocytes, fat cells that surround organs, as opposed to subcutaneous adipocytes, which are located under the skin, are very active, responsive cells. Not only do they generate hormones such as leptin that regulate metabolism, but they also secrete a variety of pro-inflammatory mediators, including TNF and IL-6. What triggers this release? Some studies suggest that intracellular stress responses associated with excessive lipid buildup induce signals that enhance production of cytokines and inflammatory mediators. Free fatty acids, a common consequence of obesity, may also play a role. They appear to have the capacity to bind toll-like receptors on adipocytes, initiating a signaling cascade analogous to that experienced by innate immune cells that recognize pathogen. Obesity is now recognized as a major, if not the major, cause of chronic inflammation, which, as you will see below, has severe consequences. Interestingly, approximately 6% of individuals who are considered obese by weight do not generate inflammatory cytokines and show few signs of metabolic dysfunction. The basis for the ability of these individuals to tolerate excess fat is an area of active investigation. Chronic inflammation can cause systemic disease. The specific consequences of chronic inflammation vary with the tissue of origin, as well as the sex, age, and health status of the individual. However, given that those who suffer from chronic inflammation all exhibit increased circulation of inflammatory mediators, including the classical pro-inflammatory cytokine trio, IL-1, IL-6, and TNF, it is not surprising that many suffer similar systemic disorders. Figure 1516. Chronic inflammation and insulin resistance. Type 2 diabetes is one of the most common consequences of chronic inflammation. Diabetes results from a failure in insulin signaling, a failure that leads to general metabolic dysfunction. Type 1 diabetes, chapter 16, is caused by the autoimmune-mediated destruction of pancreatic islet cells that make insulin. Type 2 diabetes, however, is caused by a failure of cells to respond to insulin, a state known as insulin resistance. What does inflammation have to do with insulin resistance? Inflammatory cytokines, particularly TNF and IL-6, induce signaling cascades that inhibit the ability of the insulin receptor to function. This interference is in large part due to the cytokine's ability to activate JNK, a MAPK that is often associated with stress and inflammatory responses. JNK can phosphorylate and inactivate IRS1, a key downstream mediator of insulin receptor signaling. This observation also helps explain the long-recognized association between obesity and type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome. Inflammatory cytokines released by visceral adipocytes in response to excess lipid induce signals that inhibit insulin signaling, leading to insulin resistance, a primary cause of type 2 diabetes. This perspective is directly supported by studies in mouse models where obesity was uncoupled from inflammation. Wild-type mice fed a high-fat diet became obese and developed type 2 diabetes. Mice that lacked JNK also became obese on the same diet, but did not develop diabetes. See Clinical Focus Box 15.3 for a more complete discussion of the association between obesity, inflammation, and diabetes. Allergy, hypersensitivities, and chronic inflammation, clinical focus, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and inflammation. Chapter 15.511 BOX 15.3, binding domains. The IRS proteins are then phosphorylated by the RTKs and subsequently act as adapter molecules for transmitting insulin signal to downstream molecules such as the kinases PI3 kinase and FIN, and the docking protein GRB2 and SHB2. However, if the IRS proteins are phosphorylated on serine residues by IRS serine threonine kinases, their signaling capacity is inhibited. See Figure 1. Inflammatory cytokines, such as IL-6, IL-1, TNF, bind to cell surface receptors and signal the activation of kinases, including JNK, which phosphorylate IRS1 on serine residues, inhibiting its activity. Thus, inflammatory cytokines act to inhibit the insulin signal, leading to insulin resistance. However, what is the source of the excess inflammatory cytokines released in individuals with type 2 diabetes? Patients with type 2 diabetes are frequently, although not always, obese, and so investigators began to explore the relationships between obesity and the generation of inflammatory cytokines. Mice fed high-fat diets, or those with a genetic predisposition to obesity, were found to develop chronically elevated levels of inflammatory mediators, such as TNF, IL-1, and IL-6, and increased local concentrations of chemokines, such as CCL2, which draw immune cells, particularly macrophages, into adipose tissue. Investigators therefore advanced the hypothesis that the nutrients themselves might be activating signaling pathways leading to the release of these mediators. But with what receptors are the nutrients interacting? One clue has come from genetically modified mice. Animals in which the gene encoding the TLR4 receptor has been eliminated are protected from the insulin resistance engendered by eating a high-fat diet. This suggests that the toll receptors may be recognizing the excess nutrients and initiating the inflammatory. As late as the 1960s, scientists and physicians searching for information on type 2 diabetes, obesity, or inflammation would have looked in separate chapters of physiology or pathology books. Obesity was viewed as a problem of poor nutritional management or resources, psychology, or, in the case of rare hormonal disorders, endocrinology. Type 2 diabetes was known to be a result of the inability to effectively use insulin, resulting in high blood glucose levels, hyperglycemia, and was, therefore, seen solely as the province of endocrinologists. Inflammation had been understood for close to 1,000 years to be a result of immune system activity. However, research conducted over the past few decades has resulted in a dramatic shift in our thinking regarding the centrality of inflammatory responses in many human pathologies, including type 2 diabetes. Furthermore, knowledge about how inflammatory mediators work in the cells from which they are released has helped us to understand the linkages between obesity and type 2 diabetes. Here we will explore the intersecting biological pathways that connect obesity, inflammation, and type 2 diabetes. Obesity and type 2 diabetes currently represent a public health problem of stunning proportions in the United States. As of summer 2011, 33.8% of adults in the United States are obese, defined as having a body mass index (BMI) of 30 or above, and childhood obesity rates are rising rapidly, with 17% of children and adolescents aged from 2 to 19 years falling into this category. Nor is the problem restricted to the United States. The World Health Organization reports that 300 million adults are obese and as many as 1 billion are reported to be overweight worldwide. But why should this be a problem, and what does it have to do with immunology? In type 1 diabetes, the insulin-producing cells of the islets of Langerhans are subject to autoimmune attack and are destroyed. However, in type 2 diabetes, patients experience a state of insulin resistance in which the body still makes insulin, but the responses to it are dulled and the amount of insulin in the circulation is unable to do its job of driving dietary sugar out of the bloodstream and into the waiting cells. The first indication that type 2 diabetes may result from, or at least be exacerbated by, inflammatory signals came almost 100 years ago, when it was discovered that patients receiving salicylated aspirin for inflammatory conditions showed an increase in insulin sensitivity. Studies published in the early years of the 21st century further demonstrated that patients suffering from a variety of as well as those with autoimmune diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis, including hepatitis and HIV. These diseases share the common feature of inducing an active inflammatory response. In each case, the insulin resistance was improved upon treatment with anti-inflammatory drugs. What do we know about the mechanism by which inflammation results in insulin resistance? Insulin signals a cell to import glucose by binding to a cell surface receptor that is a member of the receptor tyrosine kinase (RTK) family. When insulin binds to the receptor on the external surface of the cell, a signal is transmitted to the intracellular part of the receptor, activating the intrinsic tyrosine kinase activity of the receptor. See Chapter 3. The two halves of the insulin-bound downward receptor phosphorylate one another on tyrosine residues, and these residues then act as docking sites for other proteins in the signaling cascade. A set of 6 proteins termed the insulin receptor substrate (IRS) proteins are among the early, vitally important substrates of the insulin receptor, and they bind to it through their phosphotyrosine. Continued. 512 PRTVI. The immune system in health and disease. Clinical focus. IR. Phosphorylation on tyrosine residues enhances IRS signaling. Continued. Therapy. Fatty acids. DLRIL6R. DNF.
Micro alpha. Il-6.
TNFR, box 15.3, environment characteristic of obesity, intestinal permeability remains relatively high long after a meal is completed and thus the animal is chronically exposed to low levels of inflammatory signals. If toll receptors are signaling the release of inflammatory cytokines, what is the nature of the cell that carries these toll receptors? A significant number of studies have demonstrated the presence of macrophages and mast cells in adipose fat tissue, suggesting that these two cell types are at least in part responsible for the detection of excess nutrients and the development of inflammatory signals in adipose tissues. The roles of macrophages and mast cells in the development of obesity-associated inflammation are supported by the finding that depletion of cells bearing the CD11C marker, macrophages, dendritic cells, and neutrophils increases insulin sensitivity. In addition, it is possible that macro pH changes, newly recruited into expanding adipose tissue, may differentiate into a more potent pro-inflammatory pH phenotype than macrophages normally receive. death in lean adipose tissue. Improved insulin sensitivity in adipose tissue was also found upon depletion of mast cells, NK T cells, and CD8 T cells, whereas increased levels of CD4 and TREG cells are associated with higher levels of insulin sensitivity. TREG cells associated with adipose tissue secrete large amounts of IRS, TRP, phosphorylation of saline residues, inhibits IRS signaling, JNK and other kinases, glucose transport lipid and sugar metabolism. Figure 1. Signaling events that link obesity to insulin resistance. Several factors trigger signaling cascades that interfere with insulin receptor IR signaling cascades. Inflammatory cytokines, including TNF and IL-6, are produced by adipocytes themselves, as well as immune cells. These trigger signaling events in multiple cells that activate kinases, including JNK, which inactivate IRS by phosphorylating it as a saline residue. Thus, insulin signaling is impaired. JNK can also be activated, and insulin signaling inactivated by the interaction between toll-like receptors and free fatty acids, which are increased in obesity, based on Gray, S., and J.K. Kim, 2011, October. New insights into insulin resistance in the diabetic heart. Trends in endocrinology and metabolism 2210:394-403. Response. Indeed, TLR4 and TLR2 have both been shown to be responsive to high levels of free fatty acids. A second observation which implicates the TLR4 receptor in the sensing of a nutrient-rich environment is that serum lipopolysaccharide, LPS, in mice is increased after feeding. Perhaps, intestinal permeability is increased immediately after feeding, which allows the introduction of inflammatory molecules such as LPS directly into the circulation. In an animal fed a normal diet, this inflammation is short-lived. However, it is possible that in animals living in the nutrient-rich, chronic inflammation and susceptibility to other diseases, as part of the normal healing process, inflammatory cytokines also enhance blood vessel flow and blood vessel formation, angiogenesis, induce proliferation and activation of fibroblasts and immune cells, and regulate death of infected or damaged cells. Together, these events induce tissue remodeling that gives immune cells better access to pathogens and scarring that heals wounds. However, continual stimulation of this healing process has deleterious consequences. Overstimulation of fibroblasts leads to excessive tissue scarring, fibrosis, which can physically and severely impair organ function. Continual stimulation of cell proliferation enhances the probability of mutations and may contribute to tumor formation or growth. Enhancement of blood vessel formation can also enhance survival of cells in solid tumors. Although focusing on similarities between acute and chronic inflammation is helpful in understanding some of the consequences described, it is also important not to oversimplify the relationship. For instance, although neutrophil infiltration is a cardinal feature of acute inflammation, monocytase, macrophages, and lymphocytes accumulate during chronic inflammation. Fibroblasts associated with chronic inflammation secrete distinct cytokines and may represent distinct lineages. These differences and others underscore the importance of thoughtfully considering and customizing approaches to ameliorate inflammatory conditions. Allergy, hypersensitivities, and chronic inflammation. Chapter 15 BOX 15.3 Shin. The high blood glucose levels initially induce hyperproliferation of the pancreatic cells, but eventually apoptosis of the insulin-producing cells occurs, further exacerbating the state of high blood glucose. In the brain of animals fed a high-fat diet, inflammatory pathways are also activated in the hypothalamus, leading to resistance to the effects of both insulin and leptin, a hormone that normally signals satiety, thus setting up a positive feedback loop. The fatter the animal, the more it needs to eat to achieve satiety. In summary, current research suggests that obese animals exhibit a state of chronic inflammation resulting from the release of nutrient-stimulated inflammatory mediators by adipocytes themselves, as well as macrophages and mast cells. These inflammatory mediators in turn act on adipocytes and other cells to reduce their sensitivity to insulin, leading to the syndrome we now know as type 2 diabetes. Inflammation stimulated by nutrient excess is chronic and is associated with a reduced metabolic rate. Some have suggested that it be distinguished from the acute inflammatory state set up by infectious stimuli by using the term meta-inflammation. Clinical research has already demonstrated some success in using anti-inflammatory medications such as salicylate homologs and IL-1 receptor antagonists in the treatment of insulin resistance. IL-10, which acts, in part, to reduce the inflammatory response. Finally, recent work shows that some adipocytes, fat cells, themselves are capable of gene-acting inflammatory cytokines, including TNF and IL-6. Adipocytes also express toll-like receptors that trigger cytokine release. Excess internal lipid also appears to stimulate internal stress responses by adipocytes that enhance cytokine production. So it appears that macrophages, mast cells, NK T cells, CD8 T cells, and adipocytes all play a part in the release of pro-inflammatory mediators in adipose tissues. Another stimulus for the secretion of pro-inflammatory cytokines from adipose tissue-associated cells may be hypoxia, which develops in rapidly expanding adipose tissue. If an animal fed a high-fat diet puts on weight fairly rapidly, the newly developing vasculature, blood supply, is not always able to keep pace and the tissue may be temporarily starved of oxygen. This is known as a state of ischemia, and ischemic tissues recruit macrophages. Once present in ischemic tissues, macro-PHAs are induced to express pro-inflammatory proteins, as well as angiogenic proteins, which aid in signaling the development of an increased blood supply. Adipocytes may also contribute to this response directly. Once an animal starts down the road to obesity, its problems can become self-perpetuating. Adipocytes that are full of fat will tend to leak free fatty acids into the circulation, and these in turn induce further inflammation. Indeed, free fatty acids and cellular stress have also been shown to be additional triggers for IRS protein kinases. In addition, high levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines block the formation of new adipocytes and reduce the secretion of adiponectin, an important regulator of adipocyte production. As the obese adipocyte expands, it approaches its mechanical limit. Cellular responses to mechanical stress or death lead to the release of cytokines and additional fatty acids into the circulation. Furthermore, the swollen adipocyte also undergoes endoplasmic reticulum (ER) stress, in which an unusually high number of unfolded proteins accumulates in the ER. This, in turn, provokes the release of inflammatory cytokines and chemokines. However, the problems of the type 2 diabetic are not confined just to the adipocytes. In the liver, normally the site of glucose homeostasis, increased levels of inflammatory cytokines also help to induce insulin resistance. Gluconeogenesis, the formation of new glucose, is normally inhibited by insulin, but under inflammatory conditions gluconeogenesis is no longer suppressed and the high blood glucose levels characteristic of the type 2 diabetic are further increased. In the pancreas, the site of insulin product, summary, black square, hypersensitivities are immune disorders caused by an inappropriate response to antigens that are not pathogens. Black square hypersensitivities are classically divided into 4 categories, types IV that differ by the immune molecules and cells that cause them in the way they induce damage. Black square, the hygiene hypothesis has been advanced to explain increases in asthma and allergy incidence in the developed world and proposes that early exposure 500 allergy, hypersensitivities, 516, tolerance, autoimmunity, and transplantation. Early in the 20th century, Paul Ehrlich realized that the immune system could go awry. Instead of reacting only against foreign antigens, it could focus its attack on the host. This condition, which he termed hard autotoxicus, can result in a clinical syndrome generically referred to as autoimmunity. This inappropriate response of the immune system, directing humoral nor T-cell-mediated immune activity against self-components, is the cause of autoimmune diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis, RA, multiple sclerosis, MS, systemic lupus erythematosus, SLE, or lupus, and certain types of diabetes. Autoimmune reactions can cause serious damage to cells and organs, sometimes with fatal consequences. In some cases, the damage to cells or organs is caused by antibodies. In other cases, T-cells are the culprit. Simply stated, autoimmunity results from some failure of the host immune system to distinguish self from non-self, causing destruction of cells and organs. Although on the rise, autoimmunity is still rare, suggesting that mechanisms to protect an individual from this sort of anti-self-immune attack must exist, and they do. This process and the mechanisms that control it are collectively termed tolerance or self-tolerance. Establishing self-tolerance is complicated, involving both the elimination of immune cells that can react against self-antigens and active inhibition of immune responses against self-proteins. Our understanding of the mechanisms that control self-tolerance have really blossomed in the last decade, giving rise to new ways of understanding and treating autoimmune disease. When cell tolerance processes are working correctly, host tissue should remain undisturbed by the immune system and only foreign invaders should be attacked. As we know from Chapter 9 and will address further below, the mechanisms that maintain cell tolerance do so by establishing what is us, making them clear. These elaborate mechanisms that maintain cell tolerance also cause rejection of any transplanted tissues or cells that carry new proteins, as occurs whenever the donor is not genetically identical to the recipient. Transplantation refers to the act of transferring cells, tissues, or organs, black square, establishment and maintenance of tolerance, black square, autoimmunity, black square, transplantation immunology, from one site to another, typically from one individual to another. Transfers between two sites on the same individual, e.g., skin, or between identical twins, although not free of complication, are more likely to survive. Many diseases can be cured by implantation of a healthy organ, tissue, or cells, but the development of surgical techniques that allow this has removed one barrier to successful transplantation, but others remain. A worldwide shortage of organs for transplantation leaves tens of thousands of individuals waiting for transplant, sometimes for many years, and yet, the most formidable barrier to making transplantation a routine medical treatment is the immune system. In this chapter, we first describe our current understanding of the general mechanisms that establish and maintain tolerance to self-antigens. When these mechanisms fail, autoimmunity, the second major topic of this chapter, can result. Several common human autoimmune diseases resulting from failures of these mechanisms are described. These can be divided into two broad categories: organ-specific and multi-organ, systemic autoimmune diseases. Such diseases affect 5% to 8% of 517 characteristic butterfly rash in an SLE patient. From L. Steinman, 1993, Scientific American 269 3:80. 518 PRTVI, the immune system in health and disease, the human population, they are often chronic and debilitating, necessitating prolonged medical intervention. Several experimental animal models used to study autoimmunity, as well as therapies for treating autoimmune disease, are also discussed. In the final part of this chapter, we turn to the topic of transplantation, or situations in which cell tolerance can work against us. We begin by discussing the immunologic processes governing graft rejection, followed by current therapeutic modalities for suppressing these responses. We end with some of the most commonly transplanted tissues and the potential future role of xenotransplantation, cross-species grafts in clinical medicine. Establishment and maintenance of tolerance. The term tolerance applies to the many layers of protection imposed by the immune system to prevent the reaction of its cells and antibodies against host components. In other words, individuals should not typically respond aggressively against their own antigens, although they will respond to pathogens or even cells from another individual of the same species. Until fairly recently, this was thought to be mediated by the elimination of cells that can react against self-antigens, yielding a state of unresponsiveness to self. Contemporary studies of tolerance provide evidence for a much more active role of immune cells in the selective inhibition of responses to self-antigens. Rather than ignore self-proteins, the immune system protects them. For instance, the discovery and characterization of regulatory T cells, which in fact recognize self-proteins, have revolutionized the field of tolerance and autoimmunity, not to mention transplantation. In the first step of this process, a phenomenon termed central tolerance deletes T or B cell clones before the cells are allowed to mature if they possess receptors that recognize self-antigens with high affinity. See Chapter 9. Central tolerance occurs in the primary lymphoid organs, the bone marrow for B cells and the thymus for T cells. Figure 16.18. Because central tolerance is not perfect and some self-reactive lymphocytes find their way into the periphery and secondary lymphoid tissues, additional safeguards limit their activity. These backup precautions include peripheral tolerance, which renders some self-reactive lymphocytes in secondary lymphoid tissues inactive and generates others that actively inhibit immune responses against self. Figure 16.1b. The possibility of damage from self-reactive lymphocytes is further limited by the lifespan of activated lymphocytes, which is regulated by programs that induce cell death, apoptosis, following receipt of specific signals. The mechanisms mediating peripheral tolerance vary. Under normal circumstances, encounter of mature lymphocytes with an antigen leads to stimulation of the immune response. However, presenting the antigen in some alternate type, form, time, or location may instead lead to tolerance. Antigens that induce tolerance are called tolerogens rather than immunogens. Here, context is important. The same chemical compound can be both an immunogen and a tolerogen, depending on how and where it is presented to the immune system. For instance, an antigen presented to T cells without appropriate co-stimulation results in a form of tolerance known as energy, unresponsiveness to antigenic stimulus, whereas the same antigen presented with co-stimulatory molecules can become a potent immunogen. When some antigens are introduced orally, tolerance can be the result, whereas the same antigen given as an intradermal or subcutaneous injection can be immunogenic. In other instances, mucosally administered antigens provide protective immunity, such as in the case of Sabin's oral polio vaccine A. However, there is one general truth: tolerogens are antigen specific. The inactivation of an immune response does not result in general immune suppression, but rather is specific for the tolerogenic antigen. In adults, most encounters with foreign antigen lead to an immune response aimed at eradication. This is not true in the fetus, where, due to the immature state of the immune system, exposure to antigens frequently results in tolerance. Other than fetal exposure, factors that promote tolerance rather than stimulation of the immune system by a given antigen include the following: high doses of antigen, long-term persistence of antigen in the host, intravenous or oral introduction, absence of adjuvants, compounds that enhance the immune response to antigen, low levels of co-stimulation, presentation of antigen by immature or unactivated antigen-presenting cells, APCs. In the 1960s, researchers believed that all self-reactive lymphocytes were eliminated during their development in the bone marrow and thymus. The conventional wisdom suggested that failure to eliminate these lymphocytes led to autoimmune consequences. More recent experimental evidence has countered that belief. Healthy individuals have been shown to possess mature, recirculating, self-reactive lymphocytes. Since the presence of these self-reactive lymphocytes in the periphery does not predict or inevitably result in autoimmune reactions, their activity must be regulated in healthy individuals through other mechanisms. Mechanisms that maintain tolerance include the induction of cell death or cell energy and lymphocytes and limitations on the activity of self-reactive cells by regulatory processes. See Figure 16.1b. Cell death plays an important role in establishing and maintaining both central and peripheral tolerance. This is evidenced by the development of systemic autoimmune diseases in mice with naturally occurring mutations of either the death receptor, FOS, or FOS ligand, FOS-L, as discussed in Chapter 9. Tolerance, autoimmunity, and transplantation. Chapter 16 519a. Central tolerance. Newly emerged immature clones of lymphocytes. Exposure to self-antigens during development. Maturation of clones not specific for self-antigens present in primary lymphoid organs. B. Peripheral tolerance.
Bindforeign antigen.
Activation of effector cells against foreign antigen, lymphoid precursor, deletion of lymphocytes specific for self-antigens present in generative organs, mature lymphocytes, apoptosis, bone marrow, B cells or thymus, T cells as depicted here, maturation of clones to suppress self-antigen recognition, regulatory cells, bind self-antigen regulation, energy, Figure 16.1 central and peripheral tolerance. A. Central tolerance is established by deletion of lymphocytes in primary lymphoid organs, thymus for T cells and bone marrow for B cells if they possess receptors that can react with self-antigens or by the emergence of regulatory T cells that can inhibit self-reactive cells. B. Peripheral tolerance involves deleting, rendering energetic or actively suppressing escape lymphocytes that possess receptors that react with self-antigens. This process occurs in secondary lymphoid organs. Activated T cells express increased levels of FOS and FOS-L. In both B and T cells, engagement of FOS by FOS-L induces a rapid apoptotic death known as activation-induced cell death, AICD. Mice that carry inactivating mutations in FOS, LPR, or FOS-L, GLD, are not able to engage the AICD pathway and develop autoimmune disease early in life. See below. Antigen sequestration is one means to protect self-antigens from attack. In addition to the various mechanisms of central and peripheral tolerance, an effective means to avoid self-reactivity is sequestration or compartmentation of antigens. Peripheral tolerance, deletion, energy or regulation of lymphocytes that can recognize self-antigens in peripheral tissues. 520 PRTDI. The immune system in health and disease. For example, the anterior chamber and the lens of the eye are considered sequestered sites without lymphatic drainage and possessing tissue-specific privileged antigens that are normally isolated from interaction with immune cells. The sequestration allows these antigens to avoid encounter with reactive lymphocytes under normal circumstances. If the antigen is not exposed to immune cells, there is little possibility of reactivity. However, one possible consequence of sequestration is that the antigen is never encountered by developing lymphocytes, and thus active tolerance to the sequestered antigen is not established. If barriers between immune cells and the sequestered antigens are breached by trauma, for example, the newly exposed antigen may be seen as foreign because it was not previously encountered. Trauma to one eye that allows entry of immune cells can result in inflammation in that eye, leading to tissue destruction and impaired vision. In these cases, the other eye may also become inflamed due to the sudden entry of clones of these recently activated immune cells recognizing newly discovered tissue-specific antigens. This is not to suggest that lack of exposure to the immune system is the only factor that mediates immune privilege. A locally immunosuppressive microenvironment in tissues conventionally considered immune privileged, such as the eye and central nervous system, CNS, in addition to other active mechanisms, is believed to bias the immune response toward tolerance in these locations. We discussed further some of these pathways in the following sections, as well as in chapters 9 and 10. Central tolerance limits development of autoreactive T and B cells. One mechanism strongly influencing central tolerance is the deletion during early stages of maturation of lymphocyte clones that have the potential to react with self-components later. See figure 16.18. Consider the mechanisms that generate diversity in T cell or B cell receptors. As discussed in chapter 7, the genetic rearrangements that give rise to a functional T cell receptor, TCR, or immunoglobulin, occur through a process whereby any region gene segment can associate with any D or J gene segment. This means that the generation of variable regions that react with self-antigens is almost inevitable. If this were allowed to occur frequently, such TCR or receptors could produce mature functional T or B cells that recognize self-antigens, and autoimmune disease would ensue. Although our understanding of the precise molecular mechanisms mediating central tolerance in T and B cells is not complete, we do know that these cells undergo a developmentally regulated event called negative selection. This results in the induction of death in some, but not all, cells that carry potentially autoreactive TCR or receptors. A classic experiment by C.C. Goodnow and colleagues, described in chapter 10, made a transgenic mice expressing hen egg white lysosome, HEL, with mice expressing the transgenic immunoglobulin specific for HEL to demonstrate that self-reactive lymphocytes are removed or inactivated after encounter with self-antigen. David Nemesi and colleagues showed that some developing B cells can undergo receptor editing. In this process, the antigen-specific D region is edited or switched for a different D region gene segment via the fifth D-J recombination, sometimes producing a less autoreactive receptor with an affinity for self-antigens below a critical threshold that would lead to disease, allowing the cell to survive. As mentioned in chapters 9 and 10, the central tolerance processes of negative selection and receptor editing work to eliminate many autoreactive T cells in the thymus and autoreactive B cells in the bone marrow. Receptor editing, as well as clonal deletion or apoptosis, are now recognized as mechanisms that lead to central polar ends in developing B cells. See chapter 10. By similar mechanisms, T cells developing in the thymus that have a high affinity for self-antigen are deleted, primarily through the induction of apoptosis. See chapter 9. More recently, it has been discovered that some of these self-reactive T cells in the thymus may be spared, and that these cells may function in the periphery as antigen-specific regulatory cells working to dampen immune responses to the antigens that they recognize. See below in chapter 9. Peripheral tolerance regulates autoreactive cells in the circulation. Numerous studies have shown that central tolerance is not a foolproof process. All possible self-reactive lymphocytes are not deleted. In fact, it is now clear that lymphocytes with specificity for self-antigens are not uncommon in the periphery. Two factors contribute to this. One, novel self-antigens are expressed in the central lymphoid organs where negative selection occurs. And two, there is a threshold requirement for affinity to self-antigens before clonal deletion is triggered, allowing some weakly self-reactive clones to survive the weeding out process. Just like central tolerance, the mechanisms that control peripheral tolerance have been demonstrated by a variety of experimental strategies. As we saw in chapter 11, in order for T cells to become activated, the TCR must bind antigen presented by self-MHC, major histocompatibility complex molecules, signal 1, while at the same time, the T cell must undergo co-stimulatory engagement, signal 2. Early experiments by Mark Jenkins and colleagues showed that when CD4 T cell clones are stimulated in vitro through the TCR alone, without co-stimulation, they become anergic. Subsequent data showed that the interaction between CD28 on the T cell and CD86, B7 on the APC provided the co-stimulatory signal required for T cell activation. This led to a careful examination of co-stimulation, revealing the existence of other molecules that could bind to CD86 and the discovery of a related molecule called CTLA4. This molecule inhibits rather than stimulates T cell activation upon binding CD86. We now appreciate that many such molecules.
Let's see. So that should be the adhesion, the thalamic adhesion, subthalamic adhesion, interthalamic adhesion. Okay. And this is the mammaliothymic. Nope. Yeah. Oh, very close. Mammaliothymic tract. Okay. And that is the fornix. Okay, the intracellular synthesis stored in the. Is it stored in?